History wasn't written with ink. It was patched together with lies. Tonight, 40 deceptions that toppled kings, sold wars, minted heroes, and rewired entire nations. No lectures, just sharp, fast cases of manipulation, media theater, and weaponized myth. Ready to unlearn the obvious? 1. How do you trick the entire Nazi high command? You can't just send a fake telegram. You have to commit. You have to use a body, dress it up as a British officer, handcuff a briefcase full of fake top-secret documents to its wrist, and set it adrift off the coast of Spain. This gloriously macabre plan, codenamed Operation Mincemeat, was the Allies' solution for invading Sicily in 1943. The lie was a masterpiece of detail, complete with fake love letters and ticket stubs in the body's pockets. The Germans found it, swallowed the bait whole, and diverted their best troops to Greece, expecting an invasion there. This single, calculated lie allowed the Allies to take Sicily with far fewer casualties, hastening the downfall of Mussolini and shortening the war in Europe. 2. How do you justify a war that the public doesn't want? You put a tearful witness on camera and let television do the rest. In 1990, as the U.S. weighed intervention in Kuwait, a 15-year-old girl known only as Nayara gave harrowing testimony before Congress. Sobbing, she claimed to be a Kuwaiti hospital volunteer who witnessed Iraqi soldiers taking babies out of incubators and leaving them on the cold floor to die. The story was a sensation, broadcast everywhere, and it enraged the American public. The reality? Nayara was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S. Her testimony, organized with help from a major PR firm and later widely discredited, powerfully shifted U.S. public opinion towards supporting the First Gulf War. 3. Few lies are as passively aggressive as leaving your enemy a giant "we give up" trophy that's secretly filled with your best killers. The Trojan horse is the ultimate historical con job. After a brutal 10-year siege, the Greeks couldn't breach the walls of Troy, so they resorted to psychological warfare. They packed up their camp, sailed away, and left behind a massive wooden horse as a supposed offering to the gods. The Trojans, gloating in their victory, dragged the symbol of their enemy's failure into their city and partied. The lie wasn't a word spoken. It was a physical object, a monument to deception. That night, Greek soldiers climbed out of the horse's belly, opened the city gates, and Troy was annihilated. This single act of trickery didn't just end a war. It wrote the playbook for military deception for the next 3,000 years. 4. For nearly 7 centuries, the single most powerful institution in Europe, the papacy, based its immense earthly power on a foundational document. A document that was one of the most successful and audacious forgeries in human history. It was called the Donation of Constantine. The story claimed that in the 4th century, Emperor Constantine the Great granted the Pope and the Catholic Church permanent dominion over Rome, Italy, and the entire Western Roman Empire. This was the ultimate trump card. Popes used it to justify crowning emperors and claiming political authority over kings. The only problem? It was a complete fake, likely forged in the 8th century. By the time it was definitively proven a fraud in the 15th century, the damage was done. The lie had already shaped the political map of medieval Europe. 5. How do you lose a war you were supposedly winning on the battlefield? Simple. You invent a lie so poisonous it rots an entire nation from the inside out. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the German High Command needed a scapegoat. So they created the stab-in-the-back myth. The lie was that the German army was never defeated, but was instead betrayed by civilians on the home front. The truth? The German military was shattered, facing total collapse. But this lie was a political masterpiece. It absolved the old guard of their failure and gave Adolf Hitler the perfect narrative. The myth scapegoated minorities and political opponents, rhetoric that helped mainstream extremist anti-Semitism in Germany and helped fuel the rise of the Nazi Party. 6. For over 40 years, the global scientific community celebrated a fossil that confirmed exactly what they wanted to believe, that the first human was an Englishman. The Piltdown Man, discovered in 1912, had the large brain of a modern human and the jaw of an ape-like ancestor. He was hailed as the missing link. There was just one problem. He was a complete fake. A practical joke, assembled from a medieval human skull, the jaw of an orangutan, and fossilized chimpanzee teeth, all stained to look ancient. The scientific establishment was so blinded by ego and national pride that they ignored all the red flags. This prank didn't just make a fool of the world's top scientists. It derailed the study of human evolution for 2 generations. 7. What if the event that triggered one of America's longest and most divisive wars never actually happened? In August 1964, the White House claimed that North Vietnamese patrol boats had launched 2 unprovoked attacks on the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. The first skirmish was minor, but the second attack, the primary justification for war, was a phantom. On a dark and stormy night, jumpy sonar operators mistook the sounds of their own ship's propellers and freak weather for enemy torpedoes. LBJ later quipped in private that for all he knew, the Navy was shooting at whales, reflecting the uncertainty that night. But in public, this ghost attack was presented as a blatant act of aggression. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and a war that cost millions of lives was greenlit based on shadows and fear. 8. The image of Emperor Nero callously playing his fiddle while Rome burned is one of history's most enduring portraits of a depraved tyrant. According to Tacitus, Nero was away from Rome when the fire began and later organized relief. But the facts couldn't compete with the story. First, the fiddle wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. More importantly, the tale was a brilliant smear campaign launched by his political enemies. It was a lie so powerful it has defined his legacy for 2 millennia as the ultimate symbol of cruel and failed leadership. Despite evidence, he opened his palaces to the homeless and used his own funds to provide food. 9. The story of Pocahontas, saving John Smith from execution by throwing herself over him, is a beautiful tale of love conquering all. It's also a self-serving lie from a man who desperately needed a heroic moment. In reality, Pocahontas was a child, probably around 10 or 11 when she met the 27-year-old Smith. The execution he described was most likely a tribal adoption ceremony he completely misunderstood. Crucially, Smith only added this dramatic rescue to his memoirs years later, after Pocahontas had become a famous celebrity in England. Why? Because it made him the star of the show. This fabricated moment of romance became America's founding myth, a convenient lie that replaced the brutal reality of colonization with a sanitized fairy tale. 10. One of the most disgusting and destructive books ever written wasn't a political manifesto or a religious text. It was a shoddily written piece of hate fiction. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, first published in Russia in 1903, claimed to be the leaked minutes of a secret meeting where Jewish leaders plotted to take over the world. It was a crude, paranoid fantasy, plagiarized from a French political satire that didn't even mention Jewish people. But this clumsy forgery was treated as gospel. It was widely used in Nazi propaganda and taught in schools. This forged text became a cornerstone of anti-Semitic propaganda that helped justify mass violence, including during the Holocaust. 11. Imagine launching a global empire based on a misunderstanding fueled by media hysteria. That's the story of the USS Maine. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain, was the furious war cry that swept America in 1898 after the battleship exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 sailors. Newspaper magnates like William Randolph Hearst immediately blamed Spain, whipping the public into a war frenzy. It was presented as a cowardly act of terrorism. However, most modern inquiries point to an internal coal bunker fire rather than sabotage. No definitive evidence has ever linked Spain to the incident. The narrative proved more persuasive than the evidence, giving U.S. leaders a pretext to declare war and seize colonies. 12. Marie Antoinette's famous quote, "Let them eat cake," is the ultimate symbol of a clueless aristocrat. So out of touch she suggested pastries to starving peasants. The only problem is, she never said it. The phrase actually appeared in philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's writings when Marie was just a child, attributed to an unnamed great princess. It was anti-monarchy propaganda long before she was even queen. But for French revolutionaries, it was the perfect lie to pin on the foreign-born queen. It transformed her into the heartless villain they needed, consolidating public rage and justifying her eventual trip to the guillotine. A single, misattributed quote helped topple one of the world's most powerful monarchies. 13. On the night before Halloween in 1938, thousands of Americans believed Martians were melting New Jersey with heat rays. Orson Welles' radio adaptation of The War of the Worlds was so realistic, presented as a series of breaking news bulletins, that it triggered pockets of confusion that newspapers amplified into a legend of nationwide panic. Welles later played dumb, claiming he never intended to deceive anyone, but the broadcast was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The lie wasn't the story itself, but its presentation as fact. This single night demonstrated the terrifying power of mass media to shape reality, a lesson politicians and advertisers would never forget. 14. Using a treaty signed by a small, unrepresentative faction, the U.S. removed 16,000 Cherokee people, a forced relocation remembered as the Trail of Tears. This was the result of the Treaty of New Echota. In the 1830s, the U.S. government wanted the Cherokee Nation's land but couldn't legally just take it. So they found a tiny group of Cherokee individuals and had them sign a treaty that sold away all their ancestral lands. The U.S. government then presented this fraudulent document as the legitimate will of the entire Cherokee Nation. The lie was that this piece of paper held any authority at all. Based on this legal fiction, the U.S. Army forcibly evicted a nation from its home. 15. When you need to justify an invasion, but your target hasn't actually done anything wrong, it's time for some creative stage production. This was the Nazi solution in 1939 when they needed a pretext to invade Poland. In Operation Himmler, SS operatives dressed in Polish army uniforms staged a fake attack on a German radio station in Gliwice. They broadcast a short anti-German message in Polish, fired some shots in the air, and left behind victims in Polish uniforms as proof of the attack. The next morning, Hitler stood before the Reichstag and used this staged lie as his primary justification for launching the invasion of Poland, the act that officially began the Second World War. 16. George Washington, the man who supposedly could not tell a lie, is the hero of one of America's most famous lies. The story of a young George chopping down his father's cherry tree and confessing with, "I cannot tell a lie," is pure fiction. It was completely invented by one of his first biographers, an eccentric traveling preacher named Parson Weems, almost a decade after Washington's death. Weems needed to spice up his book and create a moral lesson for America's children. So he just made it up. But the lie was incredibly effective. It became a foundational myth, shaping the image of the nation's founder into a paragon of absolute honesty. It's the ultimate irony. America's ideal of truthfulness is built on a total fabrication designed to sell books. 17. Sometimes, all it takes to shift a nation's destiny is a single piece of paper, especially when that paper is a brilliantly timed forgery. Just 4 days before Britain's 1924 general election, the Daily Mail published a bombshell, the Zinoviev letter. Purportedly from a high-ranking Soviet official, it called on British communists to engage in seditious propaganda and prepare for armed insurrection. The public was terrified. The letter created a massive Red Scare, stoking fears that the Labour Party was secretly paving the way for a Bolshevik-style revolution. The result was a landslide victory for the Conservative Party. Years later, it was confirmed to be a sophisticated forgery. But the lie had already done its job, installing a new government and poisoning Anglo-Soviet relations for decades. 18. The Aztecs supposedly mistook Hernan Cortés for a returning god, which explains why they didn't crush him on the beach. That neat story is mostly a later framing by Spanish chroniclers. Modern historians argue the hesitation was political, not mystical. Moctezuma faced rival cities, internal factions, and a novel threat he tried to manage with gifts and intelligence gathering. Calling it prophecy turns a complex imperial chessboard into a fairy tale. The empire fell through alliances, disease, and brutal strategy, not divine confusion. 19. History is written by the victors, unless, of course, the losers have a much better marketing department. After the American Civil War, the defeated South launched the most successful propaganda campaign in U.S. history, the Lost Cause of the Confederacy. This sprawling myth systematically rewrote the war's purpose, claiming it was a noble struggle for states' rights, not for the preservation of slavery. It whitewashed slavery, recasting it as benign while mythologizing Confederate leaders. This wasn't just sour grapes. It was a calculated lie to justify the re-establishment of white supremacy. It fueled the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and the implementation of Jim Crow laws, ensuring that the Confederacy's racist ideology would poison American life for another century. 20. A false, anti-Semitic medieval myth claimed Jews used Christian children's blood in rituals, a lie that fueled centuries of persecution. This was the blood libel. Originating in 12th century England, this grotesque fantasy spread across Europe. It was internally contradictory and unfounded, requiring one to believe that a religion explicitly forbidding the consumption of blood would make it a centerpiece of its most sacred holiday. But logic was no match for hate. This lie was repeatedly used to justify massacres, pogroms, and the expulsion of entire Jewish communities. It was a piece of medieval fiction so vile and powerful that its echoes still fuel anti-Semitic movements to this day. 21. The Reichstag fire in February 1933 became the legal crowbar that pried open German democracy. Nazis blamed a lone communist and screamed uprising, then rammed through the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties and enabling mass arrests without charge. Historians still debate details of responsibility, but the key point isn't who done it. It's how the blaze was weaponized. A single night's flames justified emergency powers that dismantled opposition and cleared the path to dictatorship. 22. Some of the most destructive lies come dressed in a lab coat and call themselves science. For decades, the science of eugenics was celebrated as a progressive path to a better human race. It was a simple, terrifying idea. Society's problems could be solved by encouraging the fit to breed and preventing the unfit from doing so. This was a lie built on class prejudice and racism, disguised with charts and academic jargon. Its consequences were horrifying. In the United States, it led to laws that resulted in the forced sterilization of over 60,000 people. But its ultimate expression came when the Nazis adopted the theory wholesale, using it as the intellectual justification for their racial hygiene programs, which evolved into the Holocaust. 23. Most wars are started over land, resources, or ideology. The War of Jenkins' Ear, however, was started over a piece of pickled human gristle. In 1738, a British sea captain named Robert Jenkins appeared before Parliament, holding up a jar containing his own severed ear. He claimed Spanish coast guards had sliced it off 7 years earlier as a warning to the British. His story, amplified by politicians eager for war, caused a national outrage. In reality, Jenkins was likely a smuggler who lost his ear in a common brawl. But a single disgusting prop was all it took. Britain declared war on Spain, a brutal 9-year conflict that resulted in tens of thousands of casualties, all because a man with a jar knew how to spin a good yarn. 24. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't about events, but about ideas. Enter the Domino Theory, the intellectual crutch of the Cold War. The idea was childishly simple. If one country in a region fell to communism, all the neighboring countries would inevitably topple over like a line of dominoes. It treated complex nations with unique histories and cultures as nothing more than inanimate blocks. This dangerously simplistic lie was presented as profound geopolitical strategy by U.S. policymakers. It was used to justify massive military interventions across the globe, most disastrously in Vietnam. The fear of falling dominoes led America into a war that cost millions of lives, all based on a paranoid metaphor. 25. Napoleon was a tiny man with a towering ego, right? Not really. The legend of the Little Corporal is mostly a propaganda gag. In French units of the time, height was measured in French inches. Napoleon's recorded height of about 5 feet 2 in French measure translates to roughly 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 in modern terms, average for his era and taller than many soldiers who followed him. British caricaturists shrank him in prints to make him look petty and ridiculous, and the myth stuck. Add the image of him surrounded by the exceptionally tall Imperial Guard, and the camera of memory did the rest. The short Napoleon trope wasn't a diagnosis, it was an insult that turned into history. 26. Revered by millions, the Shroud of Turin is a famous relic. Radiocarbon tests in 1988 dated its cloth to the Middle Ages. For centuries, it has been revered as the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ, miraculously bearing his image. It was presented as a direct physical link to the central event of Christianity. But modern science delivered a rather anticlimactic verdict. Multiple radiocarbon dating tests performed by 3 separate labs all concluded the shroud was made between 1260 and 1390, the exact period when it conveniently first appeared in historical records. The miraculous image is likely the work of a clever medieval artist, making the shroud a masterpiece of faith-based forgery. 27. How do you launch a full-scale invasion of a sovereign nation in the 21st century? You sell the world a lie wrapped in the language of security. In 2003, the US government and its allies built their case for invading Iraq on the terrifying claim that Saddam Hussein possessed an active arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. Claims of an active WMD arsenal proved baseless. Intelligence was a mix of faulty assessments and fabrications, yet it still propelled a major war. These claims helped pave the way for an invasion that toppled a government, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, destabilized the entire Middle East, and eroded public trust in Western governments for a generation. 28. One of the most enduring lies in all of Roman history is the one that started an empire. Before he was Emperor Augustus, he was Octavian, a young man fighting for power after the murder of his great-uncle, Julius Caesar. His main rival was Mark Antony, who had allied himself with the Egyptian queen, Cleopatra. To win, Octavian launched a brilliant propaganda campaign. The lie was that Antony was no longer a Roman. He was a decadent puppet of a foreign seductress who planned to move the capital to Egypt. He painted the coming conflict not as a Roman civil war, which it was, but as a noble war to defend Roman values against a foreign threat. The lie worked perfectly. Rome rallied behind Octavian. He crushed Antony and Cleopatra and used his victory to dismantle the Republic and declare himself the first Roman emperor. 29. For over 50 years, one of the most profitable lies in history came with a smooth taste and a doctor's recommendation. The tobacco industry knew, with scientific certainty, that their products caused cancer and were lethally addictive, but admitting that would be bad for business. So they waged a multi-decade campaign of deception. They created their own research councils to publish junk science, paid actors to portray doctors in advertisements, and mastered the art of manufacturing doubt. It was a sustained, cynical assault on public health. Public health researchers link this decades-long deception to staggering global mortality. 30. In 1894, a French army captain named Alfred Dreyfus was convicted of treason for selling military secrets to Germany. The evidence was a single handwritten document. He was publicly disgraced and sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. The lie was the entire investigation. The document was a forgery, and Dreyfus was targeted for one reason: he was Jewish. Even after the real traitor was discovered, the Army High Command chose to double down, forging more evidence to protect their reputation rather than admit a mistake. The Dreyfus affair wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was a lie that tore France apart, exposing the deep rot of anti-Semitism in its most powerful institutions and sparking a political crisis that defined a generation. 31. How do you start a war that unifies a nation? You can always take a page out of Otto von Bismarck's book. In 1870, he needed to provoke France into declaring war on Prussia to rally the German states to his side. His opportunity came in a telegram from the Prussian king describing a tense but polite diplomatic meeting with the French ambassador. Bismarck, the master manipulator, edited the telegram, cutting it down to make it sound like the king had brutally insulted the ambassador. He then leaked his version to the press. The lie worked like a charm. French honor was inflamed, they declared war, the German states united behind Prussia, and the resulting victory created the modern nation of Germany. 32. Who needs walls when you can win a war by lying with your soldiers' bodies? Shaka Zulu didn't just revolutionize warfare in southern Africa with a new spear. He did it with a battlefield deception that reshaped regional warfare. Before Shaka, battles were often messy, ritualized standoffs. He introduced the horns of the buffalo formation. The central chest of his army would engage the enemy, then execute a feigned retreat. This was the trap. The enemy, believing they were winning, would charge forward in a disorganized mob, right into the jaws of the flanking horns of Shaka's army, who would sweep in from the sides and annihilate them. This simple, repeated piece of tactical deception allowed the Zulu kingdom to conquer a vast empire. 33. In 1717, financier John Law sold France a shimmering fantasy called the Mississippi Company. Pamphlets promised Louisiana as a bonanza of gold and gems. In reality, vast tracts were swamps and hardship. Paris went stock mad. Shares soared on hype, not profits, as the crown printed money to feed the frenzy. When confidence cracked, the bubble burst, savaging fortunes and trust in paper credit. The lesson wasn't exotic minerals in America. It was how storytelling can mint a currency of delusion until arithmetic calls it in. 34. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. That's the obvious part. The far more interesting lie is how this deeply incompetent and brutal governor, who was so tyrannical he was arrested by his own men and sent back to Spain in chains, was transformed into a national hero. For centuries after his death, Columbus was a relatively minor figure. But in the 19th century, the young United States needed a heroic, non-British founding figure to build a national identity around. So, they plucked Columbus from obscurity and rebranded him as a visionary pioneer. This lie of omission and glorification served to legitimize the concept of manifest destiny, papering over the brutal colonization of Native Americans by framing it as the inevitable result of a heroic discovery. 35. The Catholic Church has a pretty solid track record of keeping women away from the top job, which is why the legend of Pope Joan was such a devastating institutional nightmare. The story goes that in the 9th century, a brilliant woman disguised herself as a man, rose through the church hierarchy, and was elected pope. Her secret was only revealed when she shockingly gave birth in the middle of a papal procession. For centuries, this story was widely believed to be true. It was a lie that functioned as a perfect weapon for the church's enemies, used by Protestant reformers to prove the papacy was corrupt and fallible. The church was forced to deny it for ages, and a legend even claims they installed a special chair with a hole in it to physically check the gender of future popes, just in case. 36. Sometimes, a lie doesn't have to be spoken. It can be built out of bricks and mortar. Potemkin villages are the ultimate symbol of political deception. The story goes that in 1787, Russian minister Grigory Potemkin wanted to impress Empress Catherine the Great during her tour of newly conquered Crimea. So he allegedly constructed entire fake portable villages along the banks of the Dnieper River. As the Empress's barge floated by, she saw happy, prosperous peasants in front of freshly painted facades. It was a complete illusion. The villages were just shells, and the happy peasants were likely his own troops in costume. This lie, whether fully true or an exaggeration itself, gave the world a perfect term for any deceptive construction, physical or political, designed to hide an ugly truth behind a beautiful facade. 37. When you're losing a war, sometimes the only option left is to invent a secret, war-winning superweapon and hope your enemy believes you. This was Hitler's final, desperate lie: the Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons. As the Allies closed in on Germany from all sides in 1944, Nazi propaganda went into overdrive, promising a fleet of revolutionary weapons, jet fighters, rockets, even atomic bombs, that would miraculously turn the tide of the war. While some of these technologies, like the V-2 rocket, were real and terrifying, they were never going to be enough. The lie was that they could change the outcome. This propaganda was aimed squarely at the German people, a final dose of false hope designed to prolong their resistance and ensure the war ended in Germany's total destruction. 38. What's the best way to get a country to abandon its long-standing policy of neutrality and jump into a world war? You show them a secret message where their neighbor offers to help Mexico reconquer Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. In 1917, British intelligence intercepted a coded telegram from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to Mexico. It was a diplomatic bombshell. The British, desperate for American help in World War I, saw their chance. They presented the Zimmermann telegram to the US, and the American public was enraged. The telegram was real. The decisive factor was the timing and framing of its release, which maximized public impact and shattered American isolationism, fundamentally changing the outcome of the war. 39. Few lies have been as personally devastating or culturally damaging as the one that fueled the Salem witch trials. The evidence used to convict and execute 20 people was nothing more than spectral evidence. The accusers' claims that they were being tormented by the ghostly apparitions of the accused. In any sane court, this is called making stuff up. But in 1692, Salem, it was treated as undeniable fact. The lie was that a person's dreams, visions, or a teenager's hysterical fit could be considered legitimate proof of witchcraft. This acceptance of the unprovable created a deadly feedback loop of paranoia and accusation, allowing personal grudges and mass hysteria to masquerade as divine justice, turning a small colonial town into a slaughterhouse. 40. You know your monarchy is in trouble when a petty jewelry scam helps spark a revolution. The affair of the diamond necklace was a heist so audacious it would be unbelievable if it weren't true. A con artist convinced a gullible cardinal that Queen Marie Antoinette secretly wanted to buy an obscenely expensive diamond necklace but needed him to be her middleman. The con artist forged the queen's signature, got the necklace, and vanished. When the bill came due, the queen was genuinely baffled. But the public didn't buy it. The lie that she was behind it all was far more believable. Though she was not involved, the scandal cemented an image of extravagance that helped push France toward revolution. Your move: drop one truth you'd bet $100 on. If someone crushes it, reply, "I was wrong." Question for you: which single lie in this episode did the most real-world damage, and which one do people still defend today? Pay the honesty tax, like, subscribe, and post your pick with a one-line argument.